All right, everyone, welcome back. Today we're tackling something pretty intense. We're talking about Trump's proposal for the U.S. to, well, take over the Gaza Strip.
Yeah, it's causing quite a stir.
You bet it is. And you, our listeners, want to know why this is causing such a ruckus, right? Particularly, what are the disadvantages for Israel?
Exactly.
Well, buckle up because we're diving deep into a whole bunch of potential issues, legal ones, political ones, even economic ones,
Right.
like huge headaches, potentially.
It really is a fascinating situation. This isn't just like a small policy change. This is a total 180 from the U.S.'s long-standing support for a two-state solution.
Oh, absolutely. It's a huge shift.
Hmm.
Just to, refresh everyone's memory, Trump's idea, which he kind of just dropped on February 4th at a press conference with Netanyahu,
Right.
involves the U.S. taking control of Gaza, relocating all the Palestinian residents, and then, and this is the kicker, redeveloping the whole area into, get this, a booming Riviera of the Middle East.
Ambitious for sure. And while Trump's saying it's all about peace and prosperity, let's be real, there's been some serious pushback from the international community.
For a good reason, probably.
Yeah.
So we're going to dig into WHY, that is. We're going to look at potential violations of international law, how this might strain relations in the region, the increased security risks, possible political turmoil within Israel itself, and, oh yeah, a whole lot of economic uncertainty.
Absolutely.
Let's just start with the legal red flags. Forcing 2 million people out of their homes. I mean, that's going to set off some serious alarm bells globally, right?
Oh, absolutely. It's a blatant violation of international law, plain and simple. Specifically, the Geneva Convention. It falls under what they call a grave breach, up there with things like torture and hostage-taking. We're talking possible war crime accusations against both the U.S. and Israel.
Wow. And I mean, history is full of examples of what happens with forced displacement. It rarely ends well. Think about the Armenian genocide or the partition of India and Pakistan. The fallout from those events, it's still felt today.
Exactly. And just to emphasize how seriously this is being taken, Amnesty International, a very influential human rights group, has already called the plan appalling and unlawful.
Yeah, I saw that. Not mincing words at all.
Not at all. And that kind of condemnation, that can trigger sanctions, hurt Israel's global image, and put a strain on some really important diplomatic ties.
Speaking of strained relationships, let's just take a second and imagine how Israel's neighbors might be feeling about this whole thing.
Yeah.
Not exactly thrilled, I'd imagine.
You're spot on. Egypt and Jordan, both vital for Israel's security in the region, have outright rejected the proposal. They're worried about a flood of refugees, potential unrest within their own countries, and let's face it, a huge strain on their economies.
Especially Egypt, right?
Yeah.
They've historically taken in a lot of Palestinian refugees, and they're already facing economic challenges. Adding another 2 million people to the mix.
Right.
That's got to be hard no from them.
Yeah, absolutely. And you have to remember that Egypt's peace treaty with Israel has been like a cornerstone of stability in the region for decades. Damaging that relationship could unravel a lot of delicate diplomacy, leaving Israel in a much more vulnerable position.
So we've got potential war crimes, angry neighbors.
Yeah.
What about the people at the heart of this, though? The Palestinians themselves. How are groups like Hamas, who control Gaza, likely to respond to basically being uprooted?
Well, they've already condemned the proposal, calling it, and I'm quoting here, a blatant attempt to erase Palestinian identity. They see it as a violation of their right to self-determination.
Yeah. And the whole Riviera idea probably doesn't sit well with them either, does it?
It definitely comes across as tone-deaf, at best. Just imagine being told you have to relocate so your home can become a luxury tourist spot. For Palestinians, it feeds this narrative of dispossession. It reinforces this sense of distrust.
So in essence, this peace and prosperity plan could actually make things much worse, maybe even spark more violence.
It's a big risk. Forcing out the Palestinian population will very likely trigger resistance, probably fierce resistance, that could easily escalate the conflict, lead to more casualties on both sides. And that, of course, undermines Israel's security, the very thing this plan claims to want to strengthen.
It feels like a domino effect, doesn't it? One bad decision leads to another, and the whole situation just spirals.
It does. And the consequences aren't limited to the region itself. The whole world is watching, and they are not impressed.
So this isn't just some regional family squabble. We're talking global disapproval.
Big time. The UN has urged the U.S. to reconsider, reminding them about international law and potential human rights violations. Even some of Israel's closest Western allies, countries that usually support them on the world stage, are voicing serious concerns.
Ouch. That's gotta hurt.
It does. This kind of widespread condemnation can lead to diplomatic isolation, economic sanctions, and a loss of really important support, all things that would hit Israel hard.
And, historically, the U.S. has been a champion for the two-state solution, the idea of Israel and Palestine existing side by side as independent nations. Does this plan just completely torpedo that?
It throws a huge AG wrench in the works. By relocating Palestinians and repurposing Gaza, the plan just ignores the whole framework of a negotiated two-state solution. It basically slams the door on any hope for a peaceful resolution. It's like trying to solve a puzzle by tossing out half the pieces.
So instead of moving towards peace, it's likely to make things even worse.
That's a huge concern. It deepens the existing divide, erodes trust, and makes a negotiated settlement seem impossible.
Okay, so we've talked about international backlash and the potential for regional chaos, but let's zoom in on Israel itself. Is everyone in Israel on board with this plan?
Absolutely not. There is a deep division within Israel itself. Some see it as the only way to achieve true security and control, while others are extremely troubled by the ethical and legal implications.
So this plan is causing friction even within Israel.
Exactly. And that internal conflict can lead to political instability. It makes it harder to govern effectively, implement policies, and maintain unity, especially when facing external challenges.
So on top of everything else, this plan could actually weaken Israel from the inside.
It's definitely a possibility. And let's not forget the economic elephant in the room. This whole situation could be really bad for Israel's financial stability, right?
You're right. It's a big worry. We're talking about potential sanctions, the need for increased security measures, and possible damage to trade relationships because of a tarnished reputation. All of that combined could put a huge EC strain on Israel's economy. So this plan, it's looking like a minefield of potential problems.
There are a lot of red flags for sure. While there might be some short-term perceived advantages, the long-term consequences for Israel could be really, really bad.
And we've only just scratched the surface of how all this might actually play out in the long run. But hey, that's what part 2 of our deep dive is for. Stay tuned.
It really makes you wonder, is this plan even feasible, practically speaking?
Yeah, that's a good point. We've been talking about all this international backlash, the potential for things to get really messy in the region. But what about the logistics of it all? Relocating 2 million people, turning Gaza into some kind of Riviera. I mean, that's a huge undertaking.
Oh, absolutely. It'd be incredibly complex. Just the sheer scale of relocating that many people, it's mind-boggling. Where would they even go? Who's going to pay for all of this? And how do you even begin to guarantee people's safety and well-being during a process like that?
Right, because we already know Egypt and Jordan aren't exactly lining up to welcome all these displaced Palestinians.
Exactly. And even if they were, somehow, think about the strain on their resources, their infrastructure. You're talking about housing, healthcare, education, jobs.
And that's not even factoring in the potential for social unrest, political instability in those countries.
Yeah.
Adding 2 million people to the mix, many of whom would be understandably feeling resentful, displaced. I mean, that's a recipe for disaster.
Totally. And we haven't even touched on the cost of this Riviera redevelopment itself. Trump suggested maybe wealthy Gulf nations might chip in, but honestly, that feels like wishful thinking.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine any country, especially those already against the plan, wanting to pour billions into a project they see as fundamentally flawed.
It's highly unlikely. And even if the funding magically appeared, the actual construction, the development, that would be a logistical nightmare in a region that's already so unstable and conflict-ridden.
So even setting aside the moral and legal questions for a minute, the practical challenges alone make this plan seem pretty much impossible.
It really does strain credulity. This idea of transforming Gaza into some sparkling tourist haven while uprooting the entire population, it feels more like a movie plot than a realistic policy.
It does feel a bit dystopian, if we're being honest.
It does. And this brings us to another really important point, the human cost for the Palestinians themselves. We can't lose sight of the fact that they're at the center of this whole issue.
All right, we've talked about the political fallout, the legal stuff, but what about the impact on individual people?
Forcing 2 million people from their homes, no matter how you spin it, that's traumatic. It's going to lead to suffering, displacement, loss of livelihood.
And it's more than just material things, right? It's about tearing people away from their communities, their history, their sense of belonging.
Absolutely. Gaza, with all its problems, is more than just a piece of land. It's a place with a rich culture, a people with deep roots.
And this plan just disregards all of that. It treats them like like pawns in some geopolitical game.
It's dehumanizing. It's going to fuel more resentment, more resistance. It's just going to complicate an already volatile situation. Even if this plan somehow went through, it wouldn't address the fundamental issues that are driving the conflict.
So it's not really a path to lasting peace then?
It's more likely to make things worse. Real peace, stability, that comes from dialogue, negotiation, a genuine effort to understand and address everyone's needs and concerns.
Which I guess is a lot harder than just redrawing lines on a map and moving people around.
It is complex, but often that complexity just means we're dealing with a nuanced issue, and it needs thoughtful, comprehensive solutions.
So far, we've uncovered a mountain of potential issues. Legal headaches, regional fallout, economic risks, logistical nightmares, not to mention the human cost. It's a pretty grim picture.
It is concerning, there's no denying that, but it's important to remember this is still just a proposal. It's not a done deal. There's still room for dialogue, for a more reasoned approach to win out.
There's a glimmer of hope there, at least. Speaking of reasoned approaches, what about the two-state solution? Is that completely off the table now?
Well, this proposal definitely throws a wrench in things, makes an already difficult situation that much more challenging.
It's like trying to solve a Rubik's Cube that keeps getting scrambled.
Right. But it does highlight how important it is to have ongoing diplomatic efforts, a willingness to compromise from everyone involved.
Okay, let's imagine for a moment that this proposal doesn't go through. Do things just go back to how they were before?
Unfortunately, that's unlikely. Even if it fails, it's already shaken things up, exposed deep divisions and anxieties, both within Israel and internationally.
So it's like a grenade. Even if it hasn't gone off yet, it's already done some damage.
Exactly. It's created uncertainty and distrust that's hard to just erase. The aftershocks will be felt for a long time. It's going to make future peace negotiations even harder because both sides are going to be even more wary and skeptical.
You can't put the genie back in the bottle, as they say.
Exactly. And this brings us to another crucial point: unintended consequences. When you're dealing with a situation this complex, it's impossible to predict all the ramifications of such a drastic action.
So even if the people pushing this plan have good intentions, things could still backfire in a big way.
That's always a risk with these kinds of policies that involve large-scale social engineering. It's like trying to control a hurricane. You might think you're steering it in the right direction, but it often has a mind of its own.
And in this case, the hurricane could potentially devastate the whole region.
That's not an exaggeration. The potential for unintended consequences is one of the strongest arguments against this proposal.
So we've covered the legal issues, the ethical concerns, the political fallout, the economic risks, the logistical nightmares. But let's zoom out for a second. What's the bigger picture here?
The bigger picture is that this proposal reflects a worrying trend in international affairs: oversimplification and unilateralism.
Okay, break that down for me. What do you mean by oversimplification?
It means trying to solve a complex, multi-layered conflict with a simple one-size-fits-all solution. It's like trying to fix a broken engine just by changing the spark plugs. It ignores the deeper systemic problems that need to be addressed.
And what about unilateralism?
Unilateralism means acting alone without talking to or working with other stakeholders. In this case, the U.S. is essentially trying to impose its will on the region without really considering the perspectives or interests of the Palestinians, neighboring countries, or the international community as a whole.
So it's not just what the proposal says, but also how it's being done that's problematic.
Exactly. The lack of consultation, the dismissive attitude towards international law and established norms, it sets a dangerous precedent.
It's like saying, we know best and we don't care what anyone else thinks.
That's a fair assessment. And that kind of approach, it alienates allies, emboldens adversaries, and further erodes trust in the international system.
So even if this specific plan goes nowhere, the damage to America's reputation and credibility, that could last for a long time.
It's a valid concern. It signals a shift away from diplomacy, from multilateralism, which are so crucial for tackling global challenges effectively.
Okay, we've established that this proposal is a mess on pretty much every level.
Yeah.
But what's the alternative? What should the U.S. be doing instead?
That's a question worthy of its own deep dive, but I can offer a few starting points.
Okay, I'm all ears.
First and foremost, the U.S. needs to recommit to diplomacy and multilateralism. That means working with allies, with international organizations, with regional partners to find a solution that everyone can live with.
So, more talking, less dictating.
Exactly. Second, the U.S. has to prioritize human rights and dignity for all people in the region, Israelis and Palestinians.
No more talk of forced relocation or ignoring international law.
Exactly. And third, the U.S. needs to address the root causes of the conflict, not just the symptoms.
So that means going beyond just security measures and tackling things like poverty, inequality, political disenfranchisement.
You got it. It's a complex path, it's challenging, but it's the only way to achieve a truly lasting and just peace.
You've given us a lot to think about. A lot.
And that's what these deep dives are all about, encouraging critical thinking, thoughtful engagement with complex issues.
So listeners, what are your thoughts? What stands out to you from all this? Join us for the final part of our deep dive as we explore the potential long-term effects of this controversial proposal. Stay tuned. This whole thing, it just shows you how interconnected everything really is. We can't just look at this proposal on its own. We have to consider those ripple effects, how this could impact the entire region, maybe even global politics.
That's such an important point to remember. This isn't just an Israeli-Palestinian issue. This has implications for international relations, for human rights, for global security. It's a big deal.
So for our listener out there, someone who's really trying to wrap their head around this proposal, what's the takeaway here? What's the bottom line?
The bottom line is that understanding this issue means going beyond just the headlines, beyond the sound bites. It means really grappling with how complex it is, the nuances, the historical context. It's not a simple situation.
It's like peeling back the layers of an onion,
Right, yeah.
right? The more you dig in, the more you realize just how much there is to uncover.
That's a perfect analogy. And it's crucial to remember there are so many different perspectives on this issue, each one with valid points, valid concerns.
Right, and as we always say here on the Deep Dive, it's so important to engage with those diverse viewpoints. Avoid those echo chambers.
Absolutely. Critical thinking means looking at things from different angles, questioning assumptions, being open to challenging your own beliefs. It's how we grow.